Hi there folks, Silver Pill here with another unedited video. This is kind of a follow-up from a video that I did last night about the political compass and the many flaws in the way that they figure out where on the left-right, authoritarian, libertarian spectrum you fall. And what really kind of made me wonder was, well, not initially, but I took it last night so that I could answer a survey. And I found myself halfway left, basically 50% left and 0.2% 0.2% libertarian. And basically the compass, if you're not familiar with it, is the same as this. Up and down is authoritarian, libertarian, and then left and right. Just like, you know, the standard left and right that came from the French Revolution. That proto-communist bullshit. Now, my wife had always been wondering, since she took it and she found herself in the far left, far libertarian corner, and although she would have some right-wing views, she wondered what is left and right if libertarian authoritarian seems to match, you know. And I've always had a problem with National Socialism, which I consider to be my preferred model, my ideal. A lot of people put that on the right side of the spectrum, which is kind of stupid. It doesn't make sense, and it really is just a kind of a holdover from this idea that right-wing means bad, basically. Right-wing means authoritarian. People get that confused. So they look at Nazi Germany and then they think authoritarianism, fascism, so, oh, it must be right-wing. But the best that we can figure it is that left-wing means that we believe in social responsibility, in that we don't just let corporations go about doing whatever they want, destroying the environment, stripping people of their rights, while the right wing would be to suggest that, to put it in terms of one of the questions in the political compass, to agree or strongly disagree with the statement that the good of the corporation, the profit of the corporation, always ultimately serves the people, which is an alarmingly ridiculous statement to make. I don't see how anyone could possibly ever agree with that, because there is a such thing as corruption, and humans can be corrupt. So then give them power and they will corrupt. Just because they're turning a profit doesn't mean that they are working in the interests of the people. So I'm laying out how left-right doesn't make any fucking sense whatsoever. So I'm developing shit. I haven't been well lately, guys. It's this fucking weather, man. It's like if something like fucking 26, 28 degrees outside every day. Mid-60s if you're American. I can't do anything, man. I can't fucking operate like a human being. Anyway, let's get on. Left-right doesn't make sense. It's proto-communist anyway, and it's Zionist. it doesn't properly describe the dialectic of history. Okay, it doesn't really. What it is, right? Generally, when you have people who are ignorant, you give them a set of ideologies, a set of ideas, a system to which to operate amongst themselves with, and that's the left-right spectrum. Now, it's been said that National Socialism rejects the left-right system, and rightly so, because it's Jewish. Let's face it, at the end of the day. So this is what you're seeing here. Now, I know I'm screen recording, so you know, even though it's not moving, I can still point out parts of it to you. This here is my attempt to replace the political spectrum as well as the political compass. What's missing here, you could argue, and maybe I'll work it in later if it fits, is the authoritarian libertarian spectrum. Because ultimately, when we're talking about groups of people and the politics that they practice, they can choose to enforce that if needs be, or it will just happen naturally because that's the state of consciousness of that people's, right? So maybe later I will work this in. For now, I just wanted to share this real dialectic of history, which is nationalism versus globalism. You could say that the last 300 years of human history has been a conflict between these two ideologies. And you could say that isolationist policies, protectionist economics, agrarian reforms, National Socialism is an attempt to halt globalism, while on the globalist side you have a worldwide network of banking cartels. Mostly that's how they pull things together. But then you have the European Union, the United Nations, OPEC. The list goes on, and as we progress we see more of these things. NATO to an extent, although that's a kind of a military thing, it's still globalist. You have the North American Union, I don't know what they're calling it these days, and they have a Union of Africa, blah blah blah. They're trying to consolidate more and more people into larger and larger groups, which will ultimately come into one group, which is the globalist society, which means the breaking down of borders and the removing of protectionism and all that wonderful stuff that allows local people and national groups to basically be the deciding force on where they live, so that they could open it up to trade and basically destroy the land bases of everywhere and herd people into fascist nightmares, basically. The prison industrial complex, the slave labor that is still going on unhindered in the United States, people chained to farmland, etc. You can see this push, and you can see that America particularly was brought into the globalist fold with the with the death of JFK. Shit, I should have this information on hand. There is a particular man who he appointed to head of the CIA. This guy, particular scumbag, his family pretty much elitist royalty, government royalty, close ties with the Rothschilds. He was sent over to Europe to do spying before, during and after the Second World War, basically disguised as a diplomat, and then he was brought home to be an elitist spy master who, you know, he took part in MK Ultra. He was actually one of the leading forces in MK Ultra. Now, you know, we'll add as much resources to the description of this video as you need. I could keep you listening and watching and reading for days if you wish. So, what is it we're looking at here in the spectrum? Just to... Actually, you know what? I was in the middle of something and I fucking forgot to finish it. JFK, what's so big about him? Well, this guy he appointed to the CIA as CIA director decided to overthrow Guatemala. That's it, Guatemala, the initial Banana Republic. And if you're aware of that terminology, Banana Republic comes from that situation in that country where they attempted, via a democratically elected government, to kick out United Fruit, basically a globalist corporation that was ass raping that country and stealing all their bananas, basically. Not something new on planet Earth when it comes to empire. They wanted to rectify this, but then, of course, a coup occurred, and who was involved? Well, the director of the CIA. And not a year or two later, the Bay of Pigs. But before the Bay of Pigs, JFK had taken this guy out of his position because he didn't like what happened to Guatemala. He thought that was a crime, because, as we have all thought all along, JFK was a good man, and he was a part of what they call the Illuminati. He was from royalty, US royalty, but he still had cojones, you know. He had principles, and he died for those principles. People say that he tried to bring back a currency that was based on gold and all that. I'm not entirely bought over than that, and I haven't done much reading on it. But you could say, with the death of JFK, American nationalism died, and it became a globalist force on the earth. And many people have come to the conclusion independently that after JFK there were no other democratic elections. They've all been stitched up, they've all been massive illusions. And it's also kind of funny that, not funny, but bad funny, that 3 years after African Americans actually got the federal level right to vote, then the vote was absolutely meaningless. But all that aside, and we will return to history and how this dialectic unfolds, let me explain why I have made these quadrants. So you have the nationalism globalist continuum from left to right. And if we're talking about in a socialist sense, National Socialism, which, you know, people have a problem with because they immediately think of all the baggage that came with Nazi Germany, which wasn't as bad as people think, but let's just say that National Socialism is socialism without the Marxism. Marxism is a very cold, scientific way of looking at class and the world in general, people themselves as economic units. Is a very nihilist philosophy, while National Socialism is more focused on people and less on class. And people as in their hopes and dreams, and with that comes the necessity of protecting the nation. And that's what happened in Nazi Germany, whether you like it or not. There was good that came out of that. They developed their nation, they made it strong again, they kicked out the international interests as well as the other retrograde influences in the country so that it could grow strong again, because those forces were zapping the country of its resources as well as its morale. Now, on the capitalist side of the nationalist quadrants, we have anarchism. And I know that people divide anarchism into anarcho-capitalism and anarcho-communism, anarcho this, anarcho that. This is all just political theory and very, very sinisterly inspired by Marxism. Now, just as a side note, we should remember who created Marxism, and that's Zionism. It's a way of basically, through the back door with people's hopes and dreams and ideals, instituting globalism. But anarchism in its pure form is capitalistic. I mean, if there is no central authority forcing people to be a certain way, do things in a certain way, have a certain behavior, if it is anti-authoritarianism, then surely we can buy and sell. That's capitalism. And it's nationalistic simply because it's focused on localism. Maybe not nationalism in the strictest terms, but its focus is on the people themselves, as opposed to Marxism, which is focused on the economy, and fascism, which is focused on the corporation. So you can see that there's a big divide between anarchism and Marxism and corporatism, and really at the end of the day there's more, even though one might think National Socialism is authoritarian, anarchism has more in common with National Socialism than it does with Marxism. So this is fact, this is provable stuff. So on the globalist side of the continuum, we have corporatism, which we see in the United States, and which is what Mussolini tried to achieve in Italy and did to a certain extent. And that is the marriage between the state and corporate powers. Today, in the United States, we see people slowly being herded into prisons which have been corporatized instead of them being nationalized or managed on a state level. and thus more geared towards rehabilitation and punishment. Now they're more geared towards farming people and instituting slavery again, forced labor. And you have the hyper-corporatism of schooling, the medical industry. All of these things have been formalized and corporatized. And if you look closely enough, you will see that they are being harmonized with all of their other sister industries in other countries. This is the formation of the face of globalism. Now, if we look at Marxism, this is globalism. I was a Marxist when I was a teenager, and even up until I was 20. And it was kind of beat into our heads and a point of propaganda that when we do have the revolution, it needs to be a global revolution so that those mean old capitalists can't those mean old capitalists can't overthrow our Marxist paradises like those horrible white coats in Russia did, you know. Even the Trotskyites blamed the counter-revolutionaries in the Soviet Union for all of the shit that went wrong. Yes, of course. A small revolutionary group is responsible for 100 million deaths. Very good. Nice evasion. But this is the bullshit that Marxism is responsible for in the world. Hundreds of millions of deaths. Marxism is globalism. It's trying to bring the world into harmony. All nations under one system. And there's no way around this, because every Marxist group has an international, and most Marxist movements and groups belong to the Fourth International today. And that's where the orders are going to be handed down from, because as of right now, that is where the orders are being handed down from. That's where the nationalist groups get their orders from, and then the nationalist groups hand the orders down to the branches. And I know this because I was a part of it, being a part of the Socialist Workers' Party. So when the revolution does come in this mythical future, who's going to be running the local and national governments? The party. And where's the party going to get its direction from in order to maintain and spread the revolution? From the international. So I think that this way of looking at the dialectic of history, or rather this dialectic of history, is way more fitting, and I think it's the actual truth. If we look at all of the governmental structures and the politicians that go with them and their relationship with the corporations, the revolving door arrangement, you can see that this is the face of fascism. So we're given this lunatic idea that we only have two things to choose from: fascism or Marxism, or capitalism and communism, as they put it. You see the fascism here and the Marxism there, that's just one side of my continuum. But they want to make you think that that's the entire continuum. And here we have Marxism, and that's the left, and then fascism, which we call democracy colloquially, and that's the right. Now, of course, they want to fool us into thinking that we can have a synthesis of the two. That we can have a little bit of socialism. That's why we have socialist parties. That's why the Democrat Party in America is a little bit socialistic. Definitely socialistic in the way that it approaches economics. It is definitely socialist in its economics. And we have socialist parties, labor parties, all over the world. But the fact of the matter is that this is just two types of globalism creating a synthesis amongst each other to bring about globalism. That's all it is, folks. Now, the difference between the political compass of left, right, authoritarian, libertarian is that that is a static idea. Left and right has always been static. It's abstract. And you know which tribe of people on the earth, wink wink nudge nudge, are very good at giving us abstractia and telling us that it's the real world. However, my working compass, my working political compass is not abstract, it's actually happening in the world. This is a part of history and we're living in it right now. America, the European Union, the NATO-friendly Middle East, China, such countries are globalist, fascist. And, you know, you could argue that China is a bit Marxist, but it's not really. They dip in and out between fascism and Marxism. While you have, say, for instance, the Latin American countries, so-called, South America. And they have been in a continuous war ever since the formation of the United States with this globalist push. Really, you know, early 1800s, it really heated up. Where you have countries that supposedly turn Marxist. Supposedly. Okay, they may work off of the Marxist handbook every now and then. We have to ask ourselves, why have the globalist powers put up in front of us the face of South American revolution, Che Guevara and Fidel Castro? Why is a big deal made out of that? Well, you know, they are arguably the only Marxists in South America. Let's take a closer look at all of these so-called Marxist revolutions happening down there. They don't rely much on Marxist ideology. They may loan from it, but people all over the world are deluded in certain ways. It's not their fault, and it doesn't mean that they're Marxist. What's happening there is, like in the case of Guatemala, the original Banana Republic, is that they're trying to shake globalists off their back. They're not developed countries, and they have loads of resources, almost endless resources that are being stripped away from them. And they try to establish independent governments. And they use socialism. They use agrarian reforms. They nationalize resources. And their focus is on serving their people. Their people, and eradicating the prominence of class is what we see in South America. So we could, or we should rather, more accurately call these people National Socialists. They might have interest in spreading the revolution, but it's certainly not to spread it to Africa, Europe, or Asia, or even further north to North America. They're interested in spreading their revolution to other South American countries. So that's just natural, right? That's what the Nazis wanted to do. They wanted to spread their National Socialism. They tried to work it out amongst other countries. Hitler and the other faithfuls in the Nazi Party. So what we're looking at really is a global war against nationalism and globalism. That's what it is. You saw this over the last 150 years, really, in the Middle East, after the Ottoman Empire and the Persians, and they are all just collapsed. And you had these separate nations, and the colonial powers came in to basically corporatize their natural resources. What comes to mind is the Iranian situation. The British Empire tried to wrestle Iran into the Second World War on their side, but the leadership of the country at the time thought better and joined the Axis. Why did they do that? Could it be because they didn't want their resources stolen from them? Did they think that maybe their resources were better off nationalized? Well, that's what they tried to do with their oil industry after World War II. And they failed because, just like in Guatemala, globalist forces came in and deposed their democratically elected government. What happened in Libya? Just recently, we had Muammar Gaddafi. What was he trying to do? He was a socialist. He was trying to feed, house, and clothe all of his people and arm local groups. And by that, I mean have an armory in every town, so that if something kicked off, then the citizenry could go and arm themselves. Now, what happened then? The fascist Hillary Clinton, who is up for election in the United States this year, and she's going to get it because, come on, let's get real. The writing is on the wall. Nobody wants Trump, and Trump is going to do all he can to make sure that he throws the race. Now this bitch, who is in bed with Monsanto, the guys who own 90% of our fucking food at this stage, she, with her powers in the White House, I forget what is it, what post did she have at the time? I don't know. National security. I don't know. But she was a serious player in deposing Gaddafi. Now the place is a fucking mess because the globalists had actually hired many mercenaries from surrounding countries in North Africa and got them to invade Libya on their behalf. And we could get into a different story completely. Well, why not? These people, who are now still employed, we should assume, are in Libya and possibly moving north into Europe, because Libya today is the bottleneck of all of these Africans pouring into Europe. Now that the borders of Libya have been pretty much destroyed, decimated, the national cohesion is gone, they're just piling in there, waiting for boats so that they can make this journey into Europe and then destroy it. And then we come into the Coudenhove-Kalergi plan. This political theorist who loved the European Union and figured that the only way that it could really solidify and survive is if the ethnic makeup of the European peoples was to be diluted with people from all around the world, basically. Mass immigration is his policy, with the European people being basically a what's the term for this? Messitic, or I don't know. A mix, a hodgepodge of black, white, brown, and yellow, with absolutely no root or allegiance to where they are, easily moved around and thus easily manipulated because they have no allegiance to where they live. Then a world government can come about. Which is, again, further moving us away from nationalism. If we do not have ethnic groups, then we cannot have nationalism. Now, I know that I'm all over the place here, but this is the world, and it's very complex, and there's a lot of movers and shakers and manipulators involved in this. So it's kind of hard to keep on top of it, and it's kind of hard to make it a consistent story, a simple story that you can fit into your mind easily, that I can pre-package for you, and then you can install it in your brain already figured out and complete, and then unpack it in your brain, and then suddenly you know what I know. It's fucking impossible, because we're not just dealing with a simplistic idea of us versus them and this group against the other group. We seem to have a polarized consciousness, that's been rammed into our heads over thousands of years, possibly. And we're not just dealing with politics and economics. We're dealing with occult principles. We're dealing with families of people that go back thousands of years, lineages. And empires that no longer have a physical location but are trying to reestablish themselves. This is occult in origin. And there's a whole psychological study behind this as well, as to how... Jesus Christ, the screen went off. That distracted me. How it can be put into place with our compliance. We've been subject to brainwashing for so fucking long that, and the brainwashing has been so in depth that I don't think any of us realize how long we have been being brainwashed. Call me mad, if you will. But we're the ones here wrestling around in the muck with each other. The peasants, thinking that we are looking at the world properly, that we've got it all figured out. We're playing around with this dualistic left versus right. In the words of Michael Cesarian, we're playing checkers and they're playing chess. So we need to get it out of our heads that things are simple and that it's Democrats versus Republicans, or it's the nationalists versus the lefties and all this palaver. Do you want to know why we have Trump today? We have Trump because people in America and around the world have gotten rightly sick of this Punch and Judy bullshit. Like, just look at the selection of candidates if Trump wasn't in the picture. Okay, you know, some of them in the Republican side sounded very, you know, even-keeled and grounded and down to earth, you know, Ben Carson, etc. And then on the other side of the spectrum, all we had was the arch criminal Hillary Clinton, and then the Jew Bernie Sanders, who wants to tax people heavier so that he can give certain select people more benefits, is bullshit. And when you look at at least the Republican side of it, which is supposed to be conservative and right-wing and nationalist, they don't serve the purpose. We live in a completely different world, and I would say that if Trump wasn't in the picture, then people would be going fucking crazy. There'd be riots in the streets. There would possibly be an actual nationalist candidate being put up by the people, a third-party alternative. But no, we've got to bring in this fucking, and here's the hint, here's the clue, a fucking reality TV star, basically, and a fucking criminal at that, to alleviate these tensions. While we're playing checkers, they're playing chess and fucking around with us, deluding us, leading us down garden paths, all the while they consolidate their globalist agenda. And we're always falling for it. Every fucking time we're falling for it. I'm sick of this. I'm sick to my back fucking teeth of it. It says almost as if nobody's ever going to wake up. That it's going to be the same shit. Even my own wife was taken in by this fucking stupid charade. And it fucking pisses me off. Like, this brilliantly intelligent woman is still on this bullshit. And no offense if you do listen, my dear, at a later stage. It's not you. I'm not condemning you. I'm condemning the level of mindfuckery that we're under. The layers of deceit and the sophistication of the charade that even the most brightest people buy into it in the end. I'm done. I hope that I've made some kind of sense. I hope that I've tied this together in some coherent way. And you know, I have a very strict philosophy when it comes to talking about issues like this, and I don't want to spook the horses here, but we're in some serious fucking trouble if we don't wake up to what really matters in this world, and we protect that, viciously protect that. Like, all the while all of this is happening, and people are getting distracted with these sideshows, and people like me are screaming and jumping up and down, all the while that this little multi-layered fantasy land carries on. People out there are depressed, out of their homes, going hungry, deciding whether to pay the electricity bill or to buy a new pair of shoes, or suffering in a whole manner of other ways, and throwing themselves off of bridges and out of windows because they can't fucking handle it anymore, or they are taking more and more to alcoholism or prescription or street drug abuse, having heart attacks and falling into comas because they have had something dear taken away from them. And we're all slowly dying from it. And we need to wake up to that. And what we really should be focused on is each other. Because there's a lot of people out there who just need some positive, uplifting company, a friend. And I'm not talking about people online or people 5 miles away from you. I mean your next door neighbours, people in your locality, because those are the people that will be able to help you, and you will be able to help them if shit ever hits the fan. And if we're ever going to change the world, those are the people that you're going to be working with. And I have failed miserably in reaching out to those people myself, but those are the people that we need to work with. Alright, I'm done. I could go on forever and be redundant, but I won't. God bless, folks. You're going to need it.